Gayanti Tam Sma Gandharva Gayanti Tam Sma Gandharva Gayanti Tam Sma Gandharva Nrityanti Apsaraso Mudha Nrityanti Apsaro Mudha Nrityanti Apsaro Mudha Gayanti Tang Smagandharva Nrityanti Apsaro Mudha Avadayang Stadavyomni Paritrani Gana Ganaha Gayanti Tang Smagandharva Nrityanti Apsaro Mudha Avadayang Stadavyomni Paritrani Gana Ganaha Gayanti Tam Smagandharva Nityanti Apsaro Mudha. Avadayam sounded. Tada at that time. Vyomni in the sky. Vaditrani musical instruments. Gana Ganaha the rain clouds. Gayanti sang. Tam to him. Sma certainly. Gandharva the Gandharvas. Nrityanti danced. Apsarasa the Apsaras. Muda in joyful ecstasy. Translation. At the time of his descent on earth, demigods in the form of raining clouds sounded musical instruments in the sky. The celestial musicians, the Gandharvas, sang the glories of the Lord, while celestial dancing girls known as Apsaras danced in joyful ecstasy. And there's no purport, so I'll read the next one. Petu sumanaso divya kecharair apavarjitaha praseduscha disha sarva ambangshi cha mamangshi cha. At the time of the Lord's appearance, the demigods, flying freely in the sky, showered flowers. All the directions, all the waters, and everyone's mind became very satisfied. Purport, it is learned herewith that in the higher sky, There are living entities who can travel through the air without being hampered. Although we can travel in outer space, we are hampered by so many impediments, but they are not. We learn from the pages of Śrimad Bhāgavatam that the inhabitants of the planet called Siddhaloka can travel in space from one planet to another without impediment. They showered flowers on the earth when Lord Kapila, the son of Kardama, appeared. So it's these first few verses here are just talking about the appearance of Lord Kapila, and the appearance of the Lord is not like the appearance of some ordinary living entity, and I don't know if anyone here has actually seen the birth of a child, but it's not a very pleasant experience. That's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll just adjust it here. Yeah, it's the child is experiencing great difficulty, great pain when it comes out of the womb. Its head is squashed down quite small, so it can come out. Causes a great pain. The child is usually covered in placenta and blood and all sorts, according to Bhagavatam, worms and different things like that. A very, very difficult situation, and unable to communicate. It's like the child goes through so many different difficulties. This is described later in this canto, actually, in chapter 33. The child is experiencing so many difficulties because it's unable to communicate its needs, and with its body, it can't do anything. It just lies there and just cries because of the difficulty of being in the body. So it's a very, very difficult situation in a normal birth. But it's kind of interesting how people tend to romanticize the whole notion of childbirth and procreation and all that, where it's just birth, death, old age, and disease is one of the sufferings that you have to endure in this material world. But we see when an incarnation, or a partial incarnation, like we see here with Kapila Deva when he appears, it's not an ordinary thing. It's not like some ordinary living entity taking birth where they have to go through the normal sufferings of other living entities, where people are deluded about what's actually happening. We see when Kapila Deva appears, and it's similar when other forms of the Lord appear, just like we see when Krishna appeared. It's described, I think it's the 3rd chapter of the 10th canto, describes the birth of Lord Krishna. And it talks about how everywhere in the universe there was peace. Everyone was happy. Everyone was joyful. And in some situations, they probably didn't even know why. There's an interesting verse, I'm not sure where it's from. It says, Yasmin tuste jagat tushtat, that when the Lord becomes satisfied, everyone is satisfied. The whole jagat tushtat, the whole universe becomes satisfied. So powerful is the pleasure of the Lord that simply by his becoming satisfied, that everyone becomes satisfied. Because he is, as we understand from the various Upanishads, etc., Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitaram Eko Yo Vidadati Kaman, that he is the one eternal who's maintaining all the other eternals. And actually he's the source of life for everything. So we see here how when Kapila Deva is appearing, it mentions in these 2 verses actually, that the demigods are raining, in the form of raining clouds, sound musical instruments in the sky. So sometimes we have that experience, how when it's warm and it's not raining or anything like that, but you hear this like pleasant rumbling of the clouds in the sky. It's a very pleasing sound. And so this is what was going on, and they were making other pleasing sounds. So the celestial musicians, the Gandharvas, they're singing. The Gandharvas have extremely beautiful voices, so it was very pleasing to hear. And these beautiful celestial dancing girls, the Apsaras, were dancing in joyful ecstasy. And the demigods were flying freely in the sky. They're showering flowers in all directions. The waters and everyone's mind became very satisfied. I just wanted to read a few verses from the the 10th canto actually, describing the appearance of, I mean, you see with Lord Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya is not so much a reader, a little bit more in the Chaitanya Bhagavat. But it says, thereafter, this is Krishna's appearance, thereafter, at the auspicious time for the appearance of the Lord, the entire universe was surcharged with all the qualities of goodness, beauty, and peace. So you see, the whole place, the whole universe is surcharged with the mode of goodness. And what's the dominant features of the mode of goodness? Illumination and satisfaction. People are they're just completely satisfied. Yet we see in this material world, people are so dissatisfied with everything. It doesn't matter what they've got in life. They could have their ideal job, they could have their ideal living situation, whatever. Never satisfied because they always want more. And that's the nature of being in this material world, especially the nature of the mode of passion, never satisfied. And so we see here how everyone's surcharged with the qualities of goodness, beauty, and peace. Everyone was at peace because the Lord was appeared. The constellation Rohini appeared, as did the stars like the Ashwini. The sun and the moon and other stars and planets were very peaceful. All the directions appeared extremely pleasing, and the beautiful stars twinkled in the cloudless sky. Decorated with towns, villages, mines, and pasturing grounds, the earth seemed all auspicious. The rivers flowed with clear water, and the lakes and vast reservoirs, full of lilies and lotuses, were extraordinarily beautiful. In the trees and green plants, full of flowers and leaves, pleasing to the eyes, birds like cuckoos and swarms of bees began chanting with sweet voices for the sake of the demigods. So it's just mentioning here about the plants that are full of flowers and fruits. We went up to upstate New York yesterday, and many places where we passed, you could see all these flowers were blooming. It's very, very pleasing to see, nice colorful flowers, fragrant flowers, things like that. So the earth was completely like that with the appearance of Lord Krishna. Then it's saying here anyway, I think you get the story. The point is just talking about how everything was at its peak. It's just like springtime. You see how all the plants and everything are at their peak. But when Krishna appears, the whole universe is like at its peak, and everything is in its full glory. And you see also, when the birthless Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of God, was about to appear, the saints and brahmanas, who had always been disturbed by the demons like Kamsa and his men, felt peace within the core of their hearts. The kettle drums simultaneously vibrated from the upper planetary systems. The kinnaras and gandharvas began to sing auspicious songs. The siddhas and charanas offered auspicious prayers, and the vidyadharis, along with the apsaras, began to dance in jubilation. It's the same kind of thing that's happening. And we see this generally happens with the appearance of the Supreme Personality of God, and how all these personalities have become very, very happy and satisfied, knowing that the Lord's about to appear. And we see this, it's quite common with also with the appearance of a great soul, how this situation becomes very, very auspicious, or with the passing of a great soul. We see when Bhishma Dev, when he was about to pass away, how all the great sages in the universe, they came from all over the universe to hear Bhishma Dev speak, because they knew Bhishma, at the time, he was considered to be the foremost authority on Dharma, and so they knew he was going to speak, and they knew whatever he said was going to be very profound, and they wanted to hear that. And so you'll see at these various occasions how all auspicious things align just to make the occasion appear to be much, much more pleasing. And this is exactly what's going on here. It's not just like an ordinary birth, I think you get the picture how when ordinary living entities appear, it's far from being an auspicious event. And actually, oftentimes in this modern day and age, childbirth is quite inauspicious. They have to use all these various means to drag the child from the womb because of the body of the mother's not unhealthy, or there's some impediment with the childbirth, so they have to cut the womb open and pull the child out and use machines to revive the child and all this kind of stuff. So not a particularly auspicious situation. Yet we see when the Lord appears, all auspicious things are aligned. It's the most wonderful event, and it's the most beneficial event for the universe and all the living entities in the universe. And here it's also describing about the various celestial personalities. And of course, if you describe these kind of things to people in this day and age, it all sounds very much like fairy tales and fantasies and things like that. And even if we go back to the previous chapter, the bulk of the previous chapter was describing this celestial city, like an airplane city, that Kadama Muni created for the pleasure of Devahuti, so they could enjoy and ultimately come to the point of giving birth to children. And people, when you tell them these types of things, they think you're just talking about fantasy, because they have no experience of it. And mostly we find in this world, people's experience or their understanding of things is very much based on what they can experience with their senses, which gives us a limited experience. Because, how much can you understand through sensory perception, especially when, as we know, the senses are imperfect. The senses are only able to perceive so much. It's just like, you walk into a room, for instance. Do you know there's air in the room? Do you know there's not toxic poison in the room? How do you know? It's just, you just trust that it's going to be okay. So the senses, as we know, are imperfect, and you cannot, especially with the gross material senses, you cannot perceive these subtle living beings. We see that sometimes Srila Prabhupada, he would mention to his disciples that when, like there was one time they were having kirtan, I think it was in Conway Hall in London, and that they organized this big program, and at least externally it appeared like no one came, or very few came, and the devotees were feeling a bit despondent. But then Prabhupada said, "Oh, didn't you see that Lord Brahma was there, Lord Shiva was there?" He was trying to encourage them. But for someone like Srila Prabhupada, he can perceive these subtle living entities that are there, just because we can't perceive them. Sometimes I know myself, I've had the experience of you perceive there's other living entities. You have this feeling there's other living entities there, although you may not be able to see them. The subtle living entities, like ghosts, etc. They inhabit various sort of different places, but you can't always perceive these things. But just because we can't perceive something with the senses, it doesn't mean it's not there. And a lot of the spiritual reality is you're not going to be able to perceive that with your mundane senses. So it requires a certain degree of faith. It requires a certain degree of conviction to be able to understand, the situation that's actually going on, or what's actually going on. And of course, we also need to have faith in the words of Shastra and faith in the words of the spiritual master. There's a verse, I can't remember where it's from, Iha Yashe Hare Dasha, no, Kamana Masa, Nishkalasha Vasasya, Jivan Mukta Suchite. Is that the verse or is it another verse? Huh? And it mentions that if one has unflinching faith in the words of the Supreme Lord and the spiritual master, then the input of all Vedic knowledge is automatically revealed. So this is different verses, no? Yeah. Yashadeva Parabhakti, Yatadeva Tashaiti Katiya, Prakashanti Mahatmana. That to such a great soul, Prakashante, the illumination that they see. So for one who actually has faith in the words of the Guru, for one who has faith in the words in the statements of Shastra, then these things are revealed. But you'll find that generally what happens if you try to explain, especially some of the more esoteric points of the scriptures, to someone who's not a devotee or who doesn't have that kind of faith, they don't accept it, they don't believe it. And therefore they just think, oh, it's all mythology. It's all imagination. How can you believe such things? Why don't you live in the real world? They make these kind of statements. But it requires faith, it requires conviction, and it requires a degree of purification. And many elements in the transcendental path are like that. Just like here we're engaged in deity worship, and so many people are convinced it's just idolatry, you're worshipping dolls, whatever. They say so many different things like that. But this is because of their conditioned nature. They cannot understand or they cannot perceive that there is something beyond the material nature. They cannot perceive there's something beyond the material senses. But even like, someone just applying logic and reason, you can see there's so many things beyond what we can perceive with our senses. You can't perceive electricity. You can't perceive air. You can't perceive the living force within the soul, but you can see the symptoms. You can see the symptoms of electricity, like there's light in the light bulbs. That's a symptom of it. When it's transformed from one type of energy into another type of energy. You can't perceive the air, but you can perceive the symptom, especially when the air moves. Or on a cold day, when you're outside breathing, you can see the vapor that comes out of your mouth. You can perceive the symptoms of the air. So someone who just has, Prabhupada would often say, just it requires a little intelligence to be able to see the symptoms of the self. Often the scientists will try to convince us that it's just electricity that's making the body function. But then, you might remember that thing we played the other day from this Christian preacher, when he was having this conversation with a scientist, and the scientist was trying to, he was a bit smug, and he was trying to debunk the idea of God or the spiritual nature or anything like that. And so this Christian preacher was saying, he said, well, you'll have to, help me understand how it is we have emotions, how it is we have feelings, how it is we love and hate. If it's just electricity, if it's just a combination of atoms, how do these things come about? So someone who's intelligent can see the symptoms of, or understand that, everyone can see the symptoms, but someone who has a bit of intelligence can understand what these symptoms conclude. What's the conclusion of perceiving these symptoms is actually there are things that are more subtle than what we can understand just through our gross senses. And so, when we read here about these subtle living beings, they have forms that are more subtle than ours. Ours are composed more of earth, water, fire, air, ether, whereas there's a more, especially with the earth and the water, these things are stronger. Whereas those in the upper regions, their bodies tend to be more composed of more subtle ether, air kind of elements. So it's not so easy to perceive. And as you go up, you go down lower in the universe, down to the patalas, the subterranean heavenly planes, etc. Then the forms are more gross, but then as you go up, to the different, Janaloka, Mahaloka, Tapaloka, and Brahmaloka, and all these other planets above that, then the planets, the rishis, and etc. like that, you'll find that the forms become more and more subtle until you get to the topmost planet in the universe where you have spiritual forms. So, with the mundane senses, it's difficult to understand these things. But if one has, as I was saying, if one has faith in the instructions of the scripture, if one has faith in the words of the spiritual master, then one can understand these things. And through applying ourselves in the process of bhakti, we actually come to the point of realizing these things. So it's no longer just some theoretical knowledge, but we can actually understand the higher nature. And the Bhāgavatam, as Prabhupada's pointing out here in this brief purport, the Bhāgavatam gives us so much information about realities that we can't understand. But as it mentions earlier in the Bhāgavatam, this is Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, by regularly hearing, by regularly studying the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, one can come to understand these different realities which cannot be perceived through the mundane senses. So this is why it's one element of why it's important to study the Bhāgavatam is that our mind and senses become purified, so we're able to understand the absolute. I mean, okay, we understand the subtle, we get perception of these subtle realities, but also we ultimately come to the point of understanding the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead. And there's a nice verse in the, I think it's in the first canto, Krishna Swadavade Davata Bhagate Gyanadavadisa Kalanashta Punanako Dinodataha. It mentions that this Bhagavad Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in this age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. And, the symptoms of this age is also described in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. People are covered, very, 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 very covered over by the lower modes of material nature, especially in this age of Kali. We can see how passion and ignorance are very, very prominent. And as people become more and more covered over as the age progresses, then they'll be less and less able to perceive the reality, able to perceive even the subtle aspects, let alone the spiritual aspects. But by studying the Bhagavatam, by hearing the Bhagavatam, one will, we become. It's just like Lord Chaitanya describes this Chaito Dapana Marjanan. The heart becomes cleansed, and as the heart becomes cleansed, then the nature of the self is revealed, and as the nature of the self is revealed, then also you're seeing the spiritual reality. Prabhupada gives the analogy very much like in the morning when the sun rises. Initially, like when it's maybe not here because there's always lights, but if you get out in the countryside and it's a dark moon, and when you go outside, you can't see anything. You put your hand like that in front of your face, you can't see your hand. But then as the sun, as the earth is rotating and the sun starts to appear or come to the point of, even before the sun appears, when it's pending, when it's about to appear, the light from the sun, you can start to see, you can start to make out shapes. You can start to see trees on the horizon, you can start to see the shape of the hills. And then as it's coming up more and more, then you can start to see yourself. And then gradually everything becomes revealed. So in the same way, as the heart becomes purified by the process of bhakti, then one starts to perceive the nature of God. And then as we start to perceive the nature of God, we also automatically start to perceive the nature of the self. But through normal material means, one cannot understand the nature of the self, because you look at the body and you think, this is me, I am this body. But this is just mundane vision, covered by ignorance of the modes of nature. But if we engage in a spiritual process, then through the cleansing process of studying, through chanting, through associating with devotees, through all these various spiritual processes, then this vision of the self, the vision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is awoken, and we can actually see things as they are. And this is the cultivation of goodness and ultimately cultivation of transcendental understanding. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. Any questions or comments on that?
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. I was wondering how everybody in the universe figure out that the Supreme Lord is appearing.
Sorry?
How everybody knew, like Apsaras, Gandharvas, everybody knew that the Supreme Lord will appear.
Yeah, well, how they knew he was going to appear, or how they knew it was him that appeared?
How they knew that he is appearing. That's why they started making the music.
Well, I mean, there's obviously different things here. One is that it's predicted in Shastra. And so, all these, just like we know with Kalki, it's predicted that he's going to appear at the end of this age. It was understood that Lord Chaitanya was going to appear. So those who know the scriptures know that the Lord is due to appear. But also, it's just like when the sun rises, how do you know the sun's rising? Because you can see it coming on the horizon, and its light is so powerful that it just overwhelms everything else. So, yeah, you just have to see, and when the Lord appears, just like we see, when Lord Chaitanya appeared in Navadvip, what happened in the rest of the world? Especially in Europe, Renaissance. A very powerful period in European history. And this is our understanding is this is due to the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. So even for materialistic people, they have the experience of the potency of the appearance of the Lord, even though they may not understand why or how it's coming about. It's due to the appearance of the Lord. So it's very, very, it's just like, we don't really have any experience of something that powerful. Like, you look in the sky and you see the sun, that's probably the most powerful thing we know. But it's, 93 million miles away, so it's, even, it's so far away, we can still feel its power. And so if some, and the sun, I mean, millions and billions and trillions of suns emanate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He says, Aham Savasya Prabhu, that everything comes from me. And he also explains to Arjuna, he says, but you should understand that all these glorious and wonderful things, they spring from a spark of my splendor. So if you look at one sun, think how powerful it is, and then you contemplate how many millions and billions of suns there are, how powerful that is. And this is one of the smaller universes that we're in. So, and that's just one, spark coming from a spark of his splendor. So, and even Kapila Dev, he's only a portion. He's not a plenary expansion of Krishna. He only came to do a specific task. Yet still, because he is, an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his power is overwhelming. So, and we see how all the devatas, they were ecstatic because he's appearing. They're dancing, they're singing, so many things. And it's just like, with modern telecommunications. You can read about all these things that are going on in the war in Ukraine and stuff like that, and it's like, how do they know all these people they're reporting? So, and this stuff circulates around the world in seconds, like minutes after it's happened, on the other side of the planet, you can hear something's going on. So also, you see, like I was mentioning before about Bhishma, when Bhishma was leaving his body, that spread throughout the universe. And the great sages came throughout the universe. So in the same way, when the Lord appears, everyone knows about it, especially all the celestial beings and the great sages. They all know about it. And so they want to come and witness the appearance of the Lord and glorify the Lord in his appearance. So it's not an ordinary thing. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Salveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.